They thought their German Shepherd had turned on their baby. They put him outside. That night, they almost lost everything. Bastian was 3 years old, 92 pounds, trained to basic commands with the easy compliance of a dog that simply wanted to cooperate. He had been in the Calloway household since 8 weeks, and in that time had never once behaved in a way that raised concern around tearing any person. When Adrian Calloway's son Matteo arrived, Bastian accepted the new presence with the same measured calm he brought to everything. He watched the baby. He stayed nearby. He was not a dog that made dramatic gestures. That changed on a Wednesday, when Matteo was 16 months old. Adrian was in the kitchen. Matteo was in his playpen in the adjacent living room, working himself into a proper cry over a toy he couldn't reach. Bastian was near the couch. In the span of the time it took Adrian to turn off the burner on the stove, Bastian crossed the living room, lowered his face over the side of the playpen, pressed his nose directly against Matteo's open, crying mouth. Adrian grabbed him by the collar and pulled. He came but slowly, resistance in his body she hadn't felt before. He turned and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not apology, not fear, something more like urgency. He turned back toward the playpen. She said his name hard. He stopped. He sat down. He watched Matteo with a focus that made her feel cold, in a way she didn't have language for yet. Her husband, DeMarco, came home that evening, and she described what happened. T stood in the living room with Bastian and watched the dog, watched the baby, and said what she had been thinking. That doesn't look right. That's fixation. DeMarco had spent 4 years coaching youth athletics. He had read enough about child safety to have opinions about large breed dogs and small children. He knew the statistics. He knew the size differential was real. He knew that behavior changes in animals around children warranted attention. Bastian went to sleep in the mudroom that night. He sat quietly in front of the mudroom door for 2 hours. Then he lay down. He was quiet through the night. They thought the situation was managed. The next day, Matteo cried around 11 a.m., and Bastian was at the mudroom door within seconds. A sound coming from behind it that was not barking, but something more controlled and sustained, directed. Adrian let him out. He went straight to Matteo, nose toward the boy's face. Same behavior. She called her mother. Her mother had owned dogs for 30 years. She came over, watched Bastian for an hour. T said she'd never seen a dog show this kind of specific fixation without cause, and that the behavior was unpredictable enough to warrant keeping him away from the baby until they understood it. DeMarco called his brother, who had a yard with a proper fence. Bastian went there that afternoon. He was calm in the car. He was calm going into the yard. He sat near the gate and watched the road back towards their house. That night, at 11:17 p.m., Adrian woke to Matteo crying through the monitor, a different cry. She was up before she finished processing why it was different. In the nursery, Matteo was in his crib, breathing with a specific pattern she couldn't name, but knew immediately was wrong. Too fast, too shallow, color slightly off in the nightlight. She picked him up, and his body had a limpness she'd never felt. She called 911. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The paramedic who assessed Matteo was a woman named Cora Abena, 11 years in emergency response. She told Adrian during transport that Matteo was presenting with signs consistent with a febrile seizure following a rapid temperature spike. His temperature in the ambulance registered 40.2 degrees Celsius. The fever had built silently and fast. The hospital, Dr. Roman Harville, pediatric emergency, explained that Matteo's presentation was a common but potentially serious event when fever escalates rapidly in a toddler before the caregiver is aware of the temperature. He said the danger window was the period between initial fever onset and the temperature becoming perceptible through touching the child. He said they had arrived within that window. He said the outcome was good. He asked when they had first noticed Matteo was unwell. Adrian said she hadn't noticed until the cry at 11 p.m. Then she told him about Bastien, about the specific behavior beginning 2 days before the fever, about the nose toward the crying face, about removing the dog from the house. Dr. Havel was quiet. Then he said, dogs have been documented detecting the chemical signature of developing infection through breath and skin emission before fever becomes clinically apparent. The immune response produces compounds. A dog's olfactory system can register at trace concentrations. If the behavior began 2 days ago, that is consistent with the onset timeline of this presentation. He paused. He said, what you removed from the house was an early warning system. Has your dog ever done something that made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Bastien came home the following afternoon. Matteo was home by then, treated, fever broken, sleeping. Bastien came inside, walked to the nursery, stood at the door. Adrian opened it. He walked to the crib, lowered his face, held his nose near the sleeping boy's face for a long moment. Then he exhaled, turned, and walked to the rug beside the crib and lay down. He had done what he set out to do. He found what the fever had become, and now it was over. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Adrian sat on the floor of the nursery with her back against the wall and thought about the mudroom door. The sustained sound from behind it. The 2 days. The expression she had no word for. Not fear, not aggression, not apology. Urgency. The next story involves a golden retriever who started bringing specific objects to a baby's crib, tease, and the reason left the whole family in tears. He had been trying to tell her for 48 hours, and she had heard dominance. She had heard fixation. She had heard risk. The words that would have been right were different from all of those. They were simpler. The baby is sick. Let me stay.